So hopefully you can all hear me and see the screen that I am sharing. I'm going to be switching back and forth. So at any point you're not seeing what you think you should be seeing, just give me a holler. We also wanted to try to keep it pretty informal today. So if I'm going along and you have a question about something, feel free to put it in the chat, raise your hand, or just unmute yourself and start talking so that I can stop and answer you. We want to make sure that your questions are fully answered. And as Amelia mentioned, you can always call and email us. If you call, please do leave a voicemail, because if we're not in the office, then that voicemail gets forwarded to our email so that we know to call you back. And let's see, here we go. And here is our contact information right here so that you guys have that. And we also just wanted to throw out, we know that COVID continues to be a problem as we go. So as we move forward throughout this grant period, if you find that you are having any kind of problem, whether it is that you or your staff have become sick and are going to have trouble completing your grant project, or supply chains being what they are right now, you can't get what you were trying to get for your project, please reach out to us so that we can work on a solution and figure it out so that we can keep you kind of moving forward towards completing your grant project. And again, if you have questions, just let us know as we go. So here is our agenda for today. I'm going to touch very briefly on the required acknowledgement, PR, and outreach that's required by IMLS. And then we'll be focusing mainly on reporting. So quarterly check-ins for those with high dollar amount grants or those trying to get vehicles due to the supply chain issues. Interim report, final report, and I'm also going to be touching on program survey questions that we're hoping most of you won't have to do, but we'll get into that in just a little bit. So all of you should have recently got an email from Stephanie Bailey White. It was sent out on July 22nd, 2021. After this presentation, I'm going to send you a forward of that email with all its attachments, along with another attachment that we're going to go over during this presentation so that you have it all, just in case you missed it the first time. The important thing to know is that acknowledgement is not an option, it is required. So if you're doing a newspaper article with your local paper or some other type of PR, where you can, within the guidelines, you're supposed to acknowledge IMLS using their language. And I'm going to pull up this link that I have right here, and I will put, hopefully it'll let me copy this and put it in the chat so that you guys have the actual link. This is the IMLS Awardee Toolkit, or basically their acknowledgements requirements. So you can see their language for boilerplate, credit line, they're using their logo, and those logos were included in the email that I'll be forwarding to you. So if you have any questions on the wording, anything like that, you can always look at this to say, you know, what am I doing? Am I doing a newspaper article? Am I doing just, you know, a little bookmark that I printed in? It doesn't have enough space for everything. How does that change the wording? You can also always reach out to me or Donna here at ICfL, and we will work through with you whether or not you need to include something in that piece and what it should look like. So let me get back to my presentation. Sorry, I've got so many tabs open. Any questions on acknowledgements? Like I said, I'll be forwarding that email as soon as we're done here so that you all have it again. Okay. All right, I wanted to touch real quickly on the timeline again. So basically what we're looking at for reporting, those with high dollar amounts and those that are trying to get vehicles, a few of you are trying to get, you know, full bookmobiles, which sometimes have a delivery date of a year out from the time you order it. So just to make sure that those things are on track and we can get all the spending done by the time we need to and projects completed, you're basically going to be looking at a very informal check-in in October and April, if you're in one of those categories where Amelia or I are going to be reaching out and saying, hey, how are things going? Does it look like you're going to be able to get it in time? If not, what can we do to work with you? Do we need to switch, you know, to a different vehicle? What's going on? So just to kind of check on the progress with those. And then the interim report is due in January, and the final report is due August 11th. I had a question yesterday that I wanted to touch on just a little bit here quickly. So with ARPA funds, we are required at the ICfL level to spend all of the money by September 30th of 2022. That is also when any services you purchase, so hotspot service, ebook services, all those services have to end by September 30th of 2022. So what we are hoping with the informal check-ins and the interim report check-in is that we're going to kind of see where you're at. Are you moving along towards completion in August so that if any money is coming back in, if you tell us, I absolutely can't do this, I have to give you the money back, then we can go back to people that weren't awarded and maybe talk to some of them, hey, can you get something done in the time frame that's left so that we can still use the money and not just have to return it to the federal government. So the timeline for the grant is that your final report is due and all your money needs to be spent by August 11th. With that September timeframe, if you get to August 1st and you say, oh my goodness, it's not going to be here by the 11th, but I will spend it by September 15th, then you can reach out and talk to us and we'll try to work with you. But please plan on trying to spend all of your money by like July 30th to give yourself a little wiggle room. But August 11th is the date you should have on your calendar for final spending and final report. And someone said, can you clarify about the September deadline? What needs to be purchased by then? Okay, so when we are awarded funds, either LSTA or ARPA, we get a deadline from the federal government that we have to spend all the funds by a certain date or they have to be returned. So with ARPA, our deadline that if we do not have the funds spent, we have to return them by September 30th. So if some of you come back to us on August 11th and say, my award was for 100,000, but I only spent 95, I have 5,000 to give back, that August 11th gives us a little time to say, okay, we've got $5,000, what can we do with it? If you let us know on October 1st, you have $5,000 left, then we're writing a check back to the federal government for $5,000. It can no longer be used. So that is the difference. If you have already completed your project, should we go ahead and fill out the final report now? Normally, I would say yes for some of the things we do, but with this one, we're collecting outcomes. So depending on your project, it's probably better to wait and collect a little data. I would have to see the specific, look at your specific project to see if you're only buying ebooks. You might be able to give us the number of ebooks you bought, but you might not be able to talk about, the number of usages it had from now through August. So some of that data is going to be really useful for us. Someone did an HVAC upgrade. Okay, yeah. So if you have something that is very, limited, and you can give us all the receipts now, and you have everything done, yeah, you can go ahead and final report, get it done, and we'll just count it as complete. So when we get to the reports in a second here, if you look at all the questions and say, yes, I can fully answer all of that, sure. Whenever you're done, whether it's January or August, feel free to do all the reports and be done. Okay. If there are no other questions right now, then I'll keep moving forward. Okay. So if you get lost and you don't remember where the reports live, if you go back to the ARPA grant page, at the very bottom, when you scroll down, there's these brightly colored boxes. In the orange section, there's links to both the interim and the final grant report. And I think, Amelia, were you going to put the links to those? If not, I can get them in a second when I get there.
I'm happy to do that.
Okay, yeah, so here's the link. So first, I'm going to talk about the interim report and then the final report. And as Amelia said earlier, the interim report's very easy. It's basically going to be a check-in. The final report's a little more complicated, so we're going to spend most of our time talking about that. So let me get the surveys up here. Oh, and sorry, I've got my sharing screen box just on the right place where I can't click on the links. There we go. Okay, so this is the interim report. It's pretty simple. Basically, what we're looking for is, which library are you, so we know which grant we're looking at. And then we want to know basically what you've done so far and if you're going to have any issues with completion. So if you think that you're going to be fine, you can just put no in the box. If you know you're going to have an issue, so we're having some supply chain issues, we were hoping to get computers and HP says it's backlogged by 5 months or something like that, you can just give us a little blog in here. It's going to be our way to know that we need to check in with you, to follow up with you, just to see what we can do to help and maybe facilitate to move things along so that you can complete the project. If you tell us at this point that you've spent no money, you've got nothing, you don't think you're going to be able to complete, then we'll be having a conversation with you about, do you need to do something else? Do we need to end the project? So again, just a real simple check-in. What have you done so far? Are you going to be able to complete? If yes, what are the issues? And then again, a real quick kind of a general, what have you purchased so far? And then a breakdown of your original budget, which is on your approved application, broken down by categories, and then the current expenditures. So if all of your spending is in supplies and materials and you had a budget of 10,000 and so far you spent 5,500, that's basically what we want to see. Again, it's just a little flag for us to see where you're at in your spending, to check to see if you're going to be able to complete in time and if you're on track for your project. And it looks like, okay, Amelia got all of those links in the chat. And then you'll just submit. So that is the whole interim report. Pretty simple. Like I said, just a check-in. And are there any questions at this point? There's no receipts to submit with the interim report. It's just pure text, numbers. Okay. So the final report is much more complicated, and I am sorry. We tried very hard to keep it as simple as possible. And Amelia thought it might go better if I told you that this is actually the easier way, because there is a harder way to do it, and I don't think anyone would like it. So we highly encourage you to click on the link as you start your project to go look at this report. There are areas after you fill out your basic information where clicking on some boxes are going to open other boxes so that you can see all the data we're going to need. And it does get a little confusing, but the reason we need to have this is every year when I do our big federal report to IMLS, we have a very specific format we have to report our data in. And some here complain that it's fitting square pegs into round holes, but it's what we have to do. So even though it doesn't always make the most sense, it's the way I need the data in order to kind of lob it together. And this way we don't have to make all of you accounts and then you all have to do this by yourself, or you put up your own activity report, which would not be fun. So with the final report, again, we're talking about interim. You were looking at from where you started to January 13th or wherever you are when you submit. What have you done since the beginning? With the final report, we want the picture of the whole project. So you're not reporting just from the interim to the final. We want you to talk about the project as a whole. So describe the project as completed versus describe, what you've done so far for the interim. We also are looking for data that we can share. So we're asking about a success story and any tips you have for someone else who would attempt the same project. IMLS really likes it when we can kind of provide feedback for someone else who sees your project, really wants to duplicate what you did. And if you can kind of the stumbling blocks that you hit so that the next person doesn't have to reinvent the wheel when they're trying to work on a similar thing, it's just really helpful to the whole library community. So any questions so far? Nope. Okay. So this is the part where it gets a little confusing, and I encourage you to come kind of click around. These areas, every project has to have an activity when we report it to IMLS, and they have to fall into one of these 4 categories. So if you've ever attended a training that we've put on for library staff, it's usually an instruction type activity. And then under instruction, there's different definitions for a program type, a presentation, or a consultation. In general, I think a lot of what this group will be doing is actually under content, because a lot of you are purchasing content. I don't think too many of you are going to be doing programs in relation to this, but as you can see, once I've checked some boxes, then other items open up. And these are the numerical data points that we have to combine up from all of your activities for our activity that we're going to report. So if you do a program, then we need to know how many minutes, how many times you did the program, how many sessions were in the program. So there's several smaller data points that fall under this. And in general, the way we have to do it, so for example, the Make It program that we do, in the past when I've reported it to IMLS, I had to do it as 2 separate activities, one as the instruction program, and then one as the content that we used to purchase for the library. So in order for you guys to not have to do that, you just check as many boxes as you need. So if you did instruction and content, then you can go ahead and click, and it should open up all the boxes that we need for you so that you can do it all in one report, and we don't have to ask you to submit 3 or 4 different reports. Most projects are pretty singular, but some of you are doing a few different things. So this kind of keeps you with just one thing you have to submit to us. But so you can see here, like with content creation, there's items where they're asking, okay, well, how many items did you digitize? How many physical items did you create? So if you have questions about any of these definitions, I can work through it with you. I think this is going to be a general session, and then when we get down to the nuts and the bolts of you reporting, if you have questions, just call me and we'll talk through, well, I think it goes under content creation versus content acquisition, and we can work through that with you. And then the extra surveys I'll get back to in a second, but depending on the type of activity you do for certain things, again, if you've ever attended one of our trainings, you've probably got a survey at the end that had 4 to 5 questions that are the Likert scale type questions of strongly disagree, agree. Those questions are required for certain activity types. So in the email I'm going to forward to you with all of the acknowledgement information, I'm going to include the spreadsheet that I'll show in a little bit here. But if you did, for example, content acquisition that was geared towards library staff, you would have to fill in the surveys. So you would need to collect surveys when you got the items, and then you would have to report them to us here. And I will go over this in a minute, but for the most part, those surveys are required when you're doing things that are aimed at library staff, not at the general public. So for the most part, I'm thinking that most of the people in this group will not have to do these survey questions. If you decide midway through that you're going to be doing some programming, you can just reach out to me and we can talk about it and figure out if you need to do those. Okay, no questions so far. So again, oh, go ahead, Amelia.
There was just a couple things I thought I would point out. If you could scroll up to the very top where people are selecting their activity type, just a couple of heads up for folks. If you uncheck something after having checked it, the questions for that item may remain on the screen until you refresh. And I don't know what happens if you refresh the screen after you've entered information, if it'll save stuff. So what I would suggest is that you play around with this, check and uncheck stuff, refresh the screen, figure out what tables you're going to be figuring out or you're going to be completing. And then because you can't save information in this form, I would suggest maybe doing the bulk of your stuff like Word or Excel or something like that. But I just wanted to let people know that if you uncheck something, the questions related to that thing may still stay on the screen until it's refreshed. And then the other thing I was going to see, Jamie, I don't know if you're planning on addressing this later, but there was, I know when Jamie and I talked, there was a little bit of distinction that she informed me about between where if you're purchasing equipment and supplies or software, if you're purchasing that like for patrons, any of your kind of public facing stuff, that would fall under content. If you're purchasing hardware, software, equipment, or supplies that are more like for the library, that would go under procurement. It's a little bit fuzzy. So if you're not sure about that, Jamie is more than happy to answer any questions for you. I don't know, Jamie, if you wanted to touch on that at all, or if that's a little much more than what you wanted to get into right now.
Well, no, thank you for the reminder. Yeah, so just so you're aware, the way I set this up, checking the box on this top part, so please select all the activities done as this project. You have to select at least one box, but that's the only question here that's required. So you could leave this blank and go through the rest of the survey and hit submit to save all your data and then go back and edit your thing. So if you want to do all of your narrative and financial data and save and then go back in to edit in case something gets mixed up. But like here, you can see I unchecked content, but because it remembers in the background that I had the content creation checked, this box is still open, but because it's not a required question, if I leave it blank and I save my survey, it's fine. It's not going to throw a red flag that you didn't fill it in. And I did that on purpose because I know it's going to be a little confusing and I don't want you guys to, get frustrated with the form because you can't submit it because something is blocking you. So there's that. And then, yeah, as Amelia was mentioning, so procurement is really more like here we have specific procurement rules where if a purchase is over a certain amount, it's for our building infrastructure. So if you're just purchasing like PPE, that's not procurement. That's more it's not even content really, but that's more of just a simple purchase. Procurement is like the people who are doing like a bookmobile or your HVAC systems, maybe places you had to go out to quote. That's more of where procurement is falling in. So if you're getting, I'm trying to think of a good software off the top of my head, like Microsoft Office for your patrons to use, that's going to go under content. If you are buying some sort of software like security software for your library to use on your computers to monitor things, that may end up under procurement if it hits a certain threshold. So that's kind of the difference, if that helps anyone. But it is a little more of a fuzzy line. I tend to think of it more of if you have to follow specific purchasing rules because it's above a certain threshold for your agency, that's where you're looking more at procurement versus just content. And as Amelia stated, you have your patron-facing side where you're buying content for them versus the software you use for your library running it. Let's see, someone asked, so the activity done should match the type of project we choose originally, or should we expand on the original application? For example, if we procured a bookmobile and then offered programs. Yeah, so that's where, as we go, things tend to kind of expand and change. If all you manage to do is purchase the bookmobile during the time, then that's what you report on. If you purchased the bookmobile and then you had time to do a ton of programming or add it on or were able to use some of the funds for other things, then that's something we would want to add on to. But really what we're looking at when you're doing this reporting is what did you spend the money on? So not just what all activities did you do, but I spent money on the bookmobile and then I did activities. I'm going to be reporting on the money I spent for the bookmobile because that's what we have to report up to IMLS. If you want to tell us the great things you did after you had the bookmobile, Donna loves those stories. We will get them out there. But for reporting for this, you could put it in your narrative of stuff you did, but I don't think you don't need to be collecting data points for that because we just want to know with this grant, with the funds, what did you do? So if you never paid a cent for programming, then you don't have to report on that. And then if you, like I said, if you kind of talk to us midway and say, we're going to have some extra funding, can we do something extra? That's where we may need you to check a couple extra boxes. Okay, so where would a database subscription fit? Ours is geared towards job search and entrepreneur tools. I would put that under content acquisition because that's basically an item that you're getting for your patrons. And I think, so let me check content and acquisition. I think there is a box for hardware, software, licensed databases acquired. And so that's where we kind of suggest that you go play around in this because as you look at these headings, you might be able to easily see where something goes. But if you have any questions, just ask, and I'm more than happy to answer. Believe me, we do this every year, and every year, even our staff, we're always like, okay, where should we put it? Where does it fit? What do we want to do it as? So yeah, it's a little confusing. Okay, does anyone have any other questions in that section before I move on? Okay, so like I said, I will come back to these surveys in a second when we get out of the report. So the next section is about partners. And we put this definition up here. A partner is defined by MLS as a formal partnership with a signed agreement. So a lot of you, we did ask a question about, are you going to have any community partners for this project? And some of you, a lot of you said yes, you'd be working with, X, Y, or Z. For the purpose of this report, when I fill out the report on the federal level, have to check if you had partners or which partners were involved. If it is not a formal partnership, you can just check not applicable. So if you have some standing formal agreement with another library, a school district that went into this project, then like if you're the public library and you're working with the school, you'd want to check schools, and then under the type of organization, school district. So again, that's for formal partnerships, not someone that you just kind of here and there like, hey, how is it going? How are you doing? This is a formal partnership for the purpose of this project. So this grant project, did you have any formal partnerships? So for example, I think it was Lewiston, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but Lewiston was going to do a bookmobile, and they were going to work with the local college to have the college do some of the work. So there, they kind of have a partnership with the college that is official, and so they could check that as a partner for this project. And someone said, what is the number column? Let me scroll back up. I'm not sure if whoever, Chris, if you want to unmute, I'm not sure. Oh, up there, the number. Mm-hmm. So that is so it's asking like under content acquisition, the number of hardware acquired. So if you purchase 10 laptops, the number would be 10 under hardware. And then if you got 3 databases, you would put 3 under number, if that makes sense.
Would that be even if it's mixed types of hardware, like laptops and iPads or something?
Yeah, and that's where, so when we're looking at this report, this is kind of the numerical section. So maybe you got 15 different things, but they all fall under hardware. So here you can just tell us 15 because this report's a number. But when we're asking, what all did you do? And when we get down to the financial section here, please describe in general what you bought. There you can say, I bought 10 iPads, 5 laptops, and just give us a real, you don't have to tell us, every title of everything you bought, but you can give a more narrative picture other than just 15 hardware. But this basically follows exactly what I have to input on the federal level. So I need the total number. And then for our purposes, we also need the narrative. Okay. All right. So I think if there's no questions on partners, then we're down to the financial section. So this is what we kind of just touched on. So basically just, a general, I give an example here. So up above, there's like in content acquisition, there's a line for print materials. You might have put 100. And here you could say we created a collection of ESL books. We created a, job search section, something that gives us a little more narrative data about what you actually did versus just the number. And then down here again, looking at the total picture from start to end. So not just from the interim report to now, your approved budget, which is on your application. And if in the meantime, so if you email me midway through and say, hey, I need to change my budget, and it gets approved, then that's the approved budget we'll use here, and then your total expenditures. And just as a reminder, we have to spend all the money. So if you have $1,000 in your grant, plan to spend $1,000 or $1,000 in a penny, don't report $999.99, or else I have to send you an invoice for a penny. And I really don't want to do that. So plan to spend all your money plus maybe a little bit. And then as we go, if you find out you're not going to be able to spend it all, then we can go from there. And then with the final report, we do need receipts. So as you're going throughout the grant period, some of you have very large grants. You're going to be buying from a lot of different places. If you can somehow keep those grant receipts together for yourself in a folder, if you can scan them into a single PDF, that's great. If you're purchasing things from like Amazon, and you can't separate out, today I'm going to do my grant spending and tomorrow I'll do something else and have it on a separate receipt. If it's on a receipt together, then I need you to somehow circle the lines, mark the lines, let me know which part is the grant spending and which part is not included, so that when I go through and total up your receipts, I can tell what's what and I don't have to keep coming back to you to ask, hey, what am I looking at? So the way a lot of people do that is they either circle the line, mark the line at the bottom. If it's $1,000 at Amazon, they might write 753 grants remaining other, so that I have an idea of what goes where. And those will have to be uploaded. We do have to have receipts for all the funds so that we can count your grants as closed. And then it's just a typical signature and submit. So someone says, so if I budget for X number of laptops, but can actually afford 3 extra laptops, I can then purchase more, or can I add laptop cases for circulating? So the nice thing about the budget is we have these budget categories, and most things fall under supplies and materials. So if you have $5,000 in supplies and materials and you originally thought that would only get you 3 laptops, and you find a cheaper version and now you can get 6 laptops, as long as you're not changing the focus of your project, you can do that. If, on the other hand, you find out, hey, I've got $5,000 in supplies and $10,000 in services, and my supplies cost way more than I budgeted, then you email us and ask for a budget change so that we know that things are going to be shifting. And that's only if it's more than 10%. So if it's like $10 and you're just switching, I need to spend $10 more in supplies and 10 less in services, we don't need an email about that. But if it's a big change, then you would need to check it with us first, because part of the reason is that this was a competitive grant. There were people who were not awarded. So if you were originally awarded because you said you were going to do a project where you were going to buy all these laptops that could be checked out, and then you find out that you can't do that, and now you want to, I don't know, do early literacy programming, that's a completely different project. And we need to talk about it here to see if that's still something that should be fundable or whether we need to do something else. So as long as you're staying within the focus of your project, if you can get more laptops that you can use, great. If you get the laptops and you have a little extra money and you can get some pieces to make those laptops last longer, also great. So if you go, again, if you have those questions, just let me know and I can answer them. And then someone said, do you need specific documentation for salaries and benefit expenses? Yeah, so some of you do have personnel. With that, we have to have something that verifies that you are stating that the hours were not double billed between the grant and something else. So as long as you submit something that says, I don't know, 10 hours at such and such a rate, or if you have accounting software where you can kind of pull a report that shows the total amount that was billable to the grant for that person, the accounting software would be awesome. If you don't have that, then what we've done in the past is some people, like for the summer intern grants, create an Excel spreadsheet where they just say like June, 10 hours, such and such a rate, total X amount. And so then we can put that into the documentation to show that you were accounting for those hours. Okay.
Oh, I was just gonna, sorry, I was just gonna add, if you're at a bigger library and you have like timesheets where people can clock in and out using different codes, like if you can set people up with a code for different activities and you can do time and effort tracking, that makes it really easy because that usually populates right into your accounting software and you can pull those up really, really quickly.
Yeah, and you may want to keep documentation just for yourself. When I was at the Illinois State Library and working on grants, every 2 weeks I had a sheet that I kept where to the quarter hour I tracked how much time I spent on the grant so that they could track, and they just put that sheet on file for themselves. So if they ever had a question, they could pull it out. And then just to call out, if you are doing personnel, it's not just their salary, it's also the benefits for those hours. So if they're paid $10 an hour for salary, but the cost with benefits is $12.50 an hour, then you need to be charging the whole $12.50 an hour to the grant, not just the $10 an hour. If they don't have benefits, or if you're doing it as a contract, then that's something else. But just remember that. I don't think too many people are using it for personnel, but if you have any questions on that, you can let us know. Okay.
Amy?
Yep.
So on the equipment there with the unit cost of 5,000 or more requires special approval, was the grant the special approval, the budget special approval, or before we purchase large items, do we need to check with you?
So the large items that were already sent to IMLS, so like all of you that are getting a bookmobile or some of the book lockers, laptop checkout stations, those have already been approved by IMLS. If you are going to change your project, again, drastically. So I did ask him, you know, if they say they're going to get a Ford van and then it ends up having to be a different model, so we need to get clearance in. No. So if you're just changing a brand and it's materially the same cost, basically the same type of item, you don't have to run it by me again. So if you were planning to get book locker from company A, they're out. I can get it from company B for about the same price. That's fine. But if you decide, well, I can't get book lockers, they're not available, now I want to do a laptop vending station, then you need to talk to me because we will have to take that back to IMLS. When I sent those approvals, they looked at your application and the project as a whole to decide if the item would support the project and meet the state goals. So if you're materially changing your project from one thing to another, for most of the things we're trying to do, I don't think they would have a problem with, but we would have to run that by. So again, if you're just switching from type A of one thing to type B of one thing, you're okay. But again, if you have questions, just send me an email and I can let you know. But yeah, if you go to the dealership and they don't have the van you had talked about, or it's $2,000 more now because the price went up, that should be okay. And if we have to change budget lines, then we can modify your budget. We can't go up to more than you were awarded, but we can modify budget lines to make it work. Okay, no other questions? Okay, so I'm going to get out of this report and bring back up. So this is what the questions look like for the surveys that you would have to do if you're doing any of these types of activities. So you can see there's a few different types up here, but they're all for things that are aimed at library staff. So in general, ICfL does a lot of things aimed at library staff because you are our customers. You in the libraries out there, your customers are generally the general public or students. So the only one that would maybe fall to you would be instruction program aimed at the public. So if that becomes a large part of your project, then the spreadsheet I'm going to email out in a little bit, you may need to give these to attendees at your programs to try to collect survey responses. But again, since most of the things are not going to be in any of these categories, we're not really expecting that most, if anyone, is going to have to worry about this. As you design your project and move forward, if you think you're going to need to and you have questions, just let me know. You can also go into the survey for the final report and kind of click around on the different things. And if these are going to be required, it'll pop open. So if you go back in and say, okay, I'm doing a program, it's instruction, it's aimed at library staff or the general public, then this would pop open and you would know that you need to collect the questions. Okay. Okay. That's all right. And so this just again kind of lays out those ones that you would have to worry about if you were doing them. So basically programming directed at the library staff or general public, content acquisition aimed at library staff, and then planning and evaluation aimed at library staff. And the colorful version was better than that, so I'm going to skip that. So that is the basics of the reporting. We wanted to leave plenty of time for any questions you have about reporting or anything else I can answer for you about the ARPA grant. during this time. Let's see, it says, should these same interim and final reports be used for the ARPA Overdrive grant? So the ARPA Overdrive grant is separate. I've worked on that with Dylan a little bit. I believe there's only going to be a final report for that is going to be a very simple, did you spend all your money? How many titles did you get? So that will be a separate thing, totally different, even though they're both called ARPA.
I know it sounds like a lot, but just remember, if you have a really small project, your report will probably end up being fairly small. As you go through it and you're like opening the things and clicking on the things that apply to you, it probably won't be quite as overwhelming as it seems right now, just because we're showing you all the things, but just keep in mind that not all the things will apply to you, and that Jamie and I, you can ask me any question you want. I'll probably end up going to Jamie for clarification, but in case she's not here or you feel more comfortable approaching me for whatever reason, not that you should ever feel uncomfortable approaching Jamie, I'm more than happy to take questions, but Jamie is definitely the expert. Yeah, just making sure nobody has their hand raised.
Actually, for you two, so when I put in my original application, I had something that alerted you. So you sent me an edit option back. Are you doing that as well with our final reports? If you see something that looks really weird, you'll just send an edit back?
So yes and no. If I look through and I see something that looks wonky, or I read your project and say, this really was content acquisition and they didn't give me any numbers on any content that they bought, then I'll probably be sending you an edit like, hey, you say you bought laptops, but it's many. But the nice thing about this is, so if I would have had to create login accounts for all of you on our federal report website, then yes, I would have to go through and edit all your wording and all kinds of fun stuff. With this, your narratives and everything else are basically coming to us here. And then we are going to kind of suck it together to do a few reports that we put together. So you don't have to worry as much about, like when we report on the federal website, there's all these rules because taxpayers are going through looking for waste all the time. So the example I was always told is like, you don't want to name your project Fun with Robots, because then some taxpayer will be really, really upset that you're just having fun with robots versus doing STEM learning with robotics. So for those type of things in your narrative, you're not going to have to worry about, because you're just basically writing for us, and then we will kind of, we're not exactly sure how we're going to do it, but we're kind of thinking that we'll take like all the bookmobiles and lump them into one activity and then report them up. So we'll be compiling all of your data, editing it, and then putting it up. So you don't have to do that.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
And if you think, I was going to say, if you have questions later, you can always just ask. And if we're done early, we can give everybody time back for the day.
Yeah, I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat. Nobody has their hand up. I know it's a lot to absorb, so you might all wake up at 3 a.m. with a question. We probably won't answer our phone, but feel free to leave a message. We'll get back to you as soon as we can. And just want to yeah, go ahead, Jen.
So is it okay to send you guys proofs, or so I did like the Wi-Fi hotspot out in the community for somebody, and I had sent Donna my flyer before I sent it out to make sure all the recognitions and all of that were on there and okay. Is it okay to run that stuff by you before we send it out, or do you have not here to do that, other things to do, just to make sure they're correct before we print them?
I believe in the email that I'm about to send you all again, Stephanie encourages you to use Donna. Part of Donna's job is to help you guys, and so she can look through stuff, or I can look through stuff. Donna does better with PR, so But
Okay.
if you send it to us, we will look at it. We're not just going to say, no, we're not going to look at it. So,
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, especially if it's a really big PR outreach effort. You know, if you're going to be printing 500 of something, or you're going to be paying for a TV spot, or you're doing something really big, you know, we're more than happy to make sure that it's all good to go before it goes out the door. But even the small stuff, not everybody's going to be in that position. So even if you just have something small that you want to run by us, that's fine too. Do keep in mind though that we do have a lot going on, and that we also have you know, personal things going on that may have us teleworking on a certain day, or home with kids, or, you know, as COVID is entering into its third winter, we're kind of figuring that out. So the more time you can give us to respond to your questions, the more likely you are to get a good, thorough answer, or any answer, before you have deadlines approaching. So usually we'll make sure we're responding within a couple hours if possible, but it may be up to 24 hours before we can get back to you, just depending on circumstances. And, you know, please, this is one of those situations where it is much better to ask permission than to ask for forgiveness, because forgiveness may not be possible. It may just mean that you have to give us money back. So if you're not sure, if you have to make big changes to your program, or if you're just really feeling unsure about something and you want to verify with us, please, please, please reach out to us. Hopefully by now you all know that we're very friendly, we're very responsive. We want you to be successful, because your success reflects on us as well. So I'm just going to do one last sweep of all the boxes here. I don't see any other hands up.
we have one question in the chat. So if we have a budget for Overdrive, ebooks, and audiobooks, how do we give acknowledgement? So that's where if you were doing some sort of PR to your library patrons, like, hey, we've got all these new books. If you put out a flyer, then we would need you to put the IMLS acknowledgement on that flyer. You do not need to put the acknowledgement in your Overdrive program somehow stamped onto the title of each ebook. You don't need to do anything like that. So you should be able to just do it in your push to the public. So if you have signs in the library that you put up near your e-readers or something like that, then please put it on there. And that's pretty much, I think, what we'll need for the e-content type of thing.